Society feeds us a very specific, very dangerous lie from the moment we are born. We are told that blood is sacred. We are conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a safe harbor, and that no matter how much they take from you, you must constantly set yourself on fire just to keep them warm. For 33 years, I was the perfect, responsible daughter who bought into that lie completely. I was the safety net, the dependable one, the one who fixed the messes. But when the people who are supposed to protect you become the very predators bleeding you dry, you are faced with a choice. Let them consume your future or burn their entire empire to the ground. My name is Ismira Viremont. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please stay with me until the end. 6 years. That is exactly how long it took my fiancé, Ethan, and me to save $150,000. It wasn't just money sitting in a high-yield savings account. It was the physical manifestation of our entire 20s. It was skipped vacations, packed lunches, working brutal 80-hour weeks, and driving a 12-year-old sedan that rattled when it hit 60 on the highway. I work as a senior internal auditor for a massive corporate firm in downtown Chicago. My job is to find the hidden truth in numbers, to track missing assets, and to unmask corporate fraud. Ethan is an architect, a man who builds foundations designed to last a lifetime. Together, we were building ours. It was a crisp Tuesday afternoon in October when we finally stood at the summit of our hard work. We were in the brightly lit office of our realtor, the final closing documents for a beautiful 4-bedroom colonial house in the suburbs sitting right in front of us. Ethan's hand was resting warmly on the small of my back. Later that same evening, I had my final fitting for my custom silk wedding dress. Everything was perfectly aligned. The wedding was exactly 6 weeks away. The house closing was scheduled for Friday. I remember looking at Ethan, seeing the quiet, immense pride in his eyes, and feeling a profound sense of peace. We had done it. We had secured our future the right way. But peace, I would soon learn, is a highly fragile illusion when you are tethered to toxic people. That evening, just after Ethan and I had opened a modest bottle of wine in our cramped apartment to celebrate the impending house closing, the heavy knock came at our front door. I opened it to find my mother, Nalira, standing in the hallway. To understand my mother is to understand the art of covert manipulation. Nalira is not a woman who yells or throws tantrums. She is an emotional sniper. She weaponizes vulnerability, utilizing tears, sighs, and perfectly crafted tragedies to make you feel like you are the only person in the world who can save her. And that night, she delivered the performance of a lifetime. She didn't wait to be invited in. She practically collapsed into the entryway, her expensive wool coat slipping from her shoulders. She buried her face in her hands, letting out these ragged, theatrical sobs that echoed off the walls of our small living room. Ethan immediately stepped forward, his protective instincts kicking in, asking what was wrong. "It's your father," she choked out, looking up at me with eyes rimmed in red. "It's the business, Ismira. We're losing everything." My father, Corvian, owned a traditional building materials distribution company. It was his pride, his legacy, and the financial engine that had funded their comfortable, upper-middle-class lifestyle for 3 decades. My parents lived in a massive, meticulously decorated estate. They drove luxury cars, they hosted lavish dinner parties. The idea of them losing everything seemed impossible. Nalira gripped my forearms, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. She spun a devastating, highly detailed narrative. According to her, Corvian's largest development partner had filed for sudden bankruptcy, defaulting on millions of dollars in outstanding invoices. She claimed the bank had aggressively called in my father's commercial credit lines. "They are going to seize the company, Ismira," she wept, her voice breaking perfectly on the syllables. "And your father? He put the house up as collateral years ago. If the business goes under this week, the bank takes our home. The home you grew up in, Corvian's legacy, his entire life's work, will be auctioned off for pennies. He is sitting in the dark right now, talking about how he doesn't want to live anymore." She let that dark, terrifying implication hang in the quiet air of my apartment. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was paralyzing me with guilt and fear. "We need a bridge loan," she pleaded, dropping to her knees on my living room rug. I tried to pull her up, completely horrified, but she refused to budge. "The bank will give us a massive restructuring extension, but they are demanding an immediate good faith liquid deposit to halt the asset seizure. We need $150,000 by Thursday morning or we are out on the street." The exact amount of my savings. Not a penny more, not a penny less. I looked at Ethan. His jaw was clenched tight. He is a logical man, and his instincts were practically screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this picture. But how do you look at your weeping, desperate mother, the woman who brought you into this world, and tell her you won't save her life because you want to buy a house and have a pretty wedding? "Mom," I said, my voice trembling, "that money, that is our house. That is the venue deposit. If I drain that account, Ethan and I lose the house. We have to cancel the wedding. We will have absolutely nothing left." Nalira looked up at me, the tears streaming down her cheeks, and delivered the ultimate psychological blow. "I know," she whispered, her voice laced with manufactured agony. "I know I am asking you to sacrifice your dream. But you are young, Ismira. You and Ethan are so smart, so capable. You can rebuild. You have time. Your father and I, our lives are over if this happens. Please. You are the strong one. You are the responsible one. We will pay you back every single cent with interest the moment the restructuring goes through. I swear it on my life." Society tells you to save your family. The invisible chains of filial piety wrapped tightly around my throat, cutting off my air, my logic, and my boundaries. The next morning, I sat at my desk in my corporate office. My hands physically shook as I logged into the joint banking portal. I stared at the balance. $152,400. I clicked on the wire transfer tab. I typed in the routing number for my father's primary corporate account. Before I hit confirm, Ethan called me. "Are you absolutely sure about this?" he asked softly. He wasn't angry, but he was deeply resigned. "Once it's gone, Izzy. We have to call the realtor today and pull out of the closing." "They're my parents, Ethan," I whispered, fighting back tears of sheer exhaustion. If my dad does something unthinkable because I sat on this money, I could never live with myself. I clicked submit. The screen loaded and the balance plummeted to a meager $2,000. 6 years of my life erased in a millisecond digital flash. That afternoon, I made the most humiliating phone calls of my life. I called our realtor and backed out of our dream home, forfeiting our earnest money. I called the country club and canceled our wedding date, losing a massive non-refundable deposit. I called the bridal boutique and told them to put the silk dress back on the rack. I systematically dismantled my own future to save theirs. You would think that a sacrifice of that magnitude would earn you eternal gratitude. You would think my parents would be calling me every hour, weeping with thanks, treating me like the savior of the family. Instead, the moment the wire transfer cleared, a chilling, eerie silence descended. I called my mother the following day to see if the bank had halted the foreclosure. It went straight to voicemail. I texted my father. He replied 12 hours later with a brief dismissive message. "Bank is handled, very busy with the lawyers, talk later." There was no warmth, no reassurance, just a cold, heavy door slamming shut in my face. For 10 agonizing days, Ethan and I sat in our small apartment, grieving the loss of our wedding and our home, while my family practically vanished off the face of the earth. My younger sister, Talira, the eternal golden child of the family who had never worked a hard day in her life and was married to Julian, a man who endlessly bragged about his tech startups, didn't even send a text to ask how I was doing after canceling my wedding. It was a Tuesday evening, exactly 10 days after I drained my accounts, when the ultimate betrayal revealed itself. I was sitting on the sofa, scrolling mindlessly through Instagram. I am not a person who spends much time on social media, and I had long ago muted my sister Talira's main influencer page because her endless flaunting of designer bags and luxury vacations grated on my nerves. But what Talira, in her absolute arrogance, had forgotten was that she had a Finsta, a secondary private account for her close inner circle. She had accepted my follow request years ago and simply forgot I was there. A notification popped up at the top of my screen. Talira_V posted a new photo album. I clicked on it. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my phone. The oxygen simply evacuated my lungs, leaving me trapped in a silent, suffocating vacuum. The location tag at the top of the photo read, "The St. Regis Residence, Aspen, Colorado." The first image was a high-resolution shot of my entire family, Corvian, Nalira, Talira, and Julian, standing on the sprawling cedar deck of a massive multi-million-dollar resort ski villa. Behind them were the snow-capped peaks of the Rocky Mountains. My mother, the woman who had knelt on my rug weeping about homelessness 10 days ago, was wearing a brand new, pristine white Moncler ski suit that easily cost $3,000. She was holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne, her head thrown back in a wide, carefree laugh. My father was standing next to her, looking tan, relaxed, and incredibly wealthy. He was smoking a thick, imported cigar. I swiped to the next photo. It was Julian, my brother-in-law, wearing custom designer ski goggles, posing next to a rented luxury SUV. The caption underneath the album, written by my sister, read, "Surprise Family Getaway." Daddy's business is booming, and Julian's new tech venture just secured seed funding, celebrating our blessings at $10,000 a night. Hashtag blessed hashtag. Family first hashtag. Aspen Nights. I stared at the glowing screen for what felt like hours. My professional training as an internal auditor has conditioned me to look at raw data without emotion, to detach, to analyze the numbers, and the data right in front of me was screaming a terrifying, undeniable truth. There was no bankruptcy, there was no aggressive bank seizure of my father's distribution company due to a defaulted partner. My family had not been facing financial ruin. They simply wanted a massive influx of cash. They had weaponized my love, my loyalty, and my deepest fears to rob me blind. They had orchestrated a masterful theatrical heist to steal my wedding money and my house savings, and they were currently using my 6 years of blood, sweat, and tears to fund a luxury ski vacation while drinking champagne on a mountain. Ethan walked into the living room, drying his hands with a kitchen towel. He saw my face, the absolute dead stillness in my posture. "Izzy?" he asked, his voice laced with immediate concern. "What is it?" I didn't speak. I just turned the phone around and held it up. Ethan's eyes scanned the photos. He read the caption. I watched the realization hit him, watched his expression shift from confusion to pure, unadulterated fury. The veins in his neck stood out. He looked like he wanted to punch a hole straight through the drywall. "They lied," Ethan whispered, his voice trembling with rage. "They stole our house to go to Aspen." "Yes," I said. My voice didn't crack. It didn't tremble. It sounded like it belonged to a completely different person, a stranger. In that precise moment, the devoted, responsible older daughter inside me officially died. She was murdered by the woman in the white Montclair ski suit. When you are an internal auditor, you know that money never just vanishes. It leaves a footprint. It leaves a digital trail of IP addresses, routing numbers, and tax identification codes. You don't steal $150,000 from an expert in financial forensics and expect to just get away with it. I didn't burst into tears. Crying is a biological response to grief, and I was no longer grieving. I was calculating. I slowly lowered my phone and looked at my fiancé. "Ethan," I said, my voice cold, sharp, and absolutely resolute. "I am not going to call them. I am not going to scream or demand our money back. If I do that, they will just lie, hide the assets, and play the victim." Ethan looked at me, seeing the terrifying shift in my eyes. "So what are we going to do?" I stood up from the sofa and walked over to my home office desk. I opened my encrypted corporate laptop. "They think I am just a naive daughter they can use as an ATM, I told him, the blue light of the monitor reflecting off my face. "They think they are untouchable. But my father just accepted a wire transfer of $150,000 under the guise of an emergency corporate restructuring. I am going to find out exactly where my money went. And then I am going to audit their entire lives." The game had officially begun, and they had absolutely no idea that the daughter they just sacrificed was about to become their executioner. Part 2. Decoding the matrix of death. For 3 agonizing weeks after I discovered the Aspen photos, I played the most difficult role of my entire life. I played the obedient, supportive, financially ruined daughter. When you discover that your own blood has completely betrayed you, the primal instinct is to scream. You want to march over to their massive estate, kick the front door off its hinges, and demand answers. But an internal auditor knows that confrontation without irrefutable leverage is simply giving your target a chance to burn the documents. If I confronted Nalira or Corvian with a screenshot from an Instagram Finsta, they would instantly spin it. They would say the trip was a gift from Julian's investors. They would gaslight me into believing I was being ungrateful and paranoid. They would hide whatever assets they had left, and Ethan and I would never see justice, let alone our $150,000. So I waited. I sat in the shadows of my own life, meticulously reviewing my corporate access clearances, setting up secure, encrypted digital vaults on a burner hard drive, and waiting for the parasites to get hungry again. Because greedy people always get hungry. They have an insatiable void, a lifestyle they cannot mathematically sustain. Exactly 22 days after my canceled wedding date, my phone lit up on the kitchen counter. It was Nalira. I took a deep breath, smoothing my expression into a mask of total neutrality, and answered on the third ring. "Hello, Mom." "Ismira, darling," Nalira's voice purred through the speaker. It wasn't the frantic, sobbing performance from a month ago. This time, she adopted the tone of a slightly inconvenienced aristocrat. "How are you holding up, sweetie? Your father and I have been so incredibly busy finalizing the corporate restructuring, we barely have a moment to breathe. We feel just terrible about the wedding." I looked across the kitchen island at Ethan. He was chopping vegetables, but his knife stopped moving the second he heard her voice. "We are managing, Mom," I replied, keeping my voice perfectly flat. "It's been hard." I know, she sighed, a beautifully practiced sound of sympathy. "Listen, darling. The reason I'm calling is that we have a tiny, ridiculous hiccup. It's actually Julian. He is in the middle of outfitting his new flagship office for his tech startup. You know, the one that just got seed funding? But his primary contractor is being an absolute nightmare over a supply chain delay. They are threatening to put a mechanic's lien on the property over a trivial $30,000 invoice. I didn't say a word. I just let her talk, letting her dig the hole deeper. Julian's capital is tied up in a massive offshore escrow account for the next 10 days, Nalira continued, her tone shifting seamlessly from conversational to demanding. If this contractor files a public lien, it will completely ruin Julian's Series A funding optics. Your father and I have our capital locked in the restructuring. We just need a quick $30,000 in liquid cash to make this peasant contractor go away. Julian will reimburse you the moment his escrow clears next week. You still have your emergency fund, don't you?" The sheer, unadulterated audacity of the request was breathtaking. They had drained my house fund, stolen my wedding, used the cash to go skiing in Aspen, and now they were circling back to pick my bones clean for my brother-in-law's fake tech company. I didn't scream. I didn't hang up. The trap I had been waiting for had just perfectly presented itself. "Mom, I would love to help Julian," I said, injecting just the right amount of hesitant compliance into my voice. "But, you know, Ethan and I lost our earnest money. The only capital I have left is locked in my company's high-yield corporate mutual fund. It's strictly regulated." "Well, just withdraw it, Ismira. Pay the early withdrawal penalty." "Julian will cover this penalty fee," she snapped, her aristocratic patience instantly vanishing when faced with a boundary. "It's not about the penalty, Mom. It's federal anti-money laundering compliance," I lied smoothly. I was using my corporate vocabulary to completely overwhelm her. To instantly liquidate $30,000 and wire it to a third party, my compliance department requires me to verify the recipient's corporate status. I cannot send it to Julian's personal checking. I need to wire it directly into his corporate operating account. To authorize that, I need Julian's employer identification number, his EIN, and temporary read-only access to his financial subledger just to verify the corporate entity is in good standing. It's a standard 10-minute digital handshake. If he can provide that, I can push the $30,000 through by tomorrow morning. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in Nalira's head. She didn't understand a single word of the financial jargon I just used. All she heard was $30,000 by tomorrow morning. "That sounds overly complicated, Ismira," she huffed. "It's federal law, Mom. It's the only way I can access the cash. Have Julian email me his EIN and a temporary login to his accounting portal. I won't be able to move any money without it." I hung up the phone. Ethan was staring at me, a mixture of awe and nervous anticipation on his face. "Do you really think Julian is arrogant enough to hand an auditor the keys to his financial records?" Ethan asked, leaning against the counter. I opened my laptop and smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "Julian thinks I am just a glorified bean counter who obeys her mother. He spends his life pretending to be the smartest man in the room. Men like Julian never believe a woman they view as subservient could possibly understand the matrix they've built." 14 minutes later, an email dropped into my personal inbox. It was from Julian Vance. The subject line read, "Corporate Verification Docs Confidential." Inside was his company's EIN and a temporary guest password to his QuickBooks and banking subledger. He had just handed me the master key to his own destruction. I locked the door to my home office, drew the blinds, and went to work. I didn't just look at Julian's surface-level accounts. I used my clearance to cross-reference his EIN with Federal Corporate Registries, the Small Business Administration, SBA, database, and county property tax records. I stopped being a sister-in-law. I became a forensic surgeon, dissecting a financial corpse. What I found in the first 2 hours of the audit was so profoundly disturbing that I actually had to step away from my desk and grip the edge of the bookshelf just to steady my breathing. Twist number 2 was waiting for me in the dark corners of the Uniform Commercial Code UCC lien registry. Nalira had sat on my rug and cried that Corvian's business was being seized by the bank because a partner had defaulted. When I pulled the legal filings against my father's distribution company, I discovered that the first part of her story was actually true. The bank was actively foreclosing on Corvian's company. He was losing his life's work. But the reason was a catastrophic, devastating lie. There was no defaulted partner. My father's business was failing because Corvian, in his desperate need to be seen as a high society patriarch, had secretly signed over his entire company as collateral for 3 massive federal relief loans. And who was the recipient of these massive SBA loans? Julian Vance. Julian had applied for over $2 million in federal funding for his supposed tech startup, but a shell company with no revenue cannot secure $2 million without collateral. So, my father, blinded by his golden child Talira and completely enchanted by Julian's charismatic lies about upcoming tech mergers, had co-signed the loans. He had chained his entire 30-year legacy to a professional grifter, and Julian, predictably, had defaulted. He hadn't made a single payment in 8 months. The federal government had called in the debt, and the bank was now liquidating my father's distribution company to cover Julian's massive fraud. I sat back in my chair, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in my eyes. The puzzle pieces violently snapped together. When Nalira came to my apartment begging for $150,000, it wasn't a good faith deposit to halt a bank seizure. The seizure was already final. Corvian's business was completely dead in the water. They were broke. So what did they do with my wedding money, my house money, my 6 years of sacrifice? I clicked into Julian's subledger, tracing the incoming wire transfer from my account to my father's, and then watching where the money flowed next. It was sickening. $30,000 went immediately to a luxury auto dealership. A massive down payment on a brand new Porsche Macan for Talira because heaven forbid her country club friends see her driving a 3-year-old vehicle. $20,000 went to pay off Julian's high-interest VIP credit cards. And the rest? It was siphoned out in daily, aggressive cash withdrawals to fund their lifestyle illusion, including the $10,000 a night ski villa in Aspen. They had sacrificed me not to save the family legacy, but to fund a spectacular, delusional cover-up. They were bleeding out, and they used my future as a bandage so they could pretend to be wealthy for just a few more months. I felt a cold, dark void open up in the center of my chest. Any lingering shred of familial obligation I held for my parents evaporated into nothingness. They were not victims. They were willing accomplices to a parasite. But Julian's subledger held a secret far darker than a stolen Porsche. I decided to dig into the actual SBA loan applications. To secure $2 million from the federal government, Julian had to prove his tech startup had a massive, highly compensated payroll. I downloaded the submitted tax documents and the W-2 forms Julian had provided to the federal lending authorities. As I scrolled through the list of his supposed senior software engineers and executive directors, my eyes caught a sequence of numbers that made my blood run entirely cold. It was a social security number, 9 digits that I had memorized since I was 16 years old. I looked at the name attached to the SSN. Ismera Viramont, Chief Financial Officer. Annual salary, $250,000. Right below my name was another familiar string of digits. Ethan Hayes, Lead Systems Architect. Annual salary, $210,000. I stopped breathing. The hum of my laptop's cooling fan sounded deafening in the silent room. Julian Vance hadn't just exaggerated his business metrics. He had committed textbook synthetic identity fraud. He had stolen my social security number and Ethan's social security number, likely lifting them off old tax documents stored at my parents' house. He had forged our signatures, created fake payroll histories, and presented us to the United States federal government as highly paid executives in his phantom tech empire. He used our pristine credit and our stolen identities to illegally siphon millions of dollars from federal relief funds. This was no longer a family dispute over a canceled wedding. This was no longer just about a manipulative mother and an arrogant brother-in-law. This was identity theft. This was bank fraud. This was massive, multi-million-dollar wire fraud. Julian had crossed the line into a federal felony punishable by up to 30 years in a maximum security prison. And by knowingly hiding the money and benefiting from the fraud, my father and mother were legally classified as co-conspirators. I printed every single document. The forged W-2s, the SBA loan applications with Corvian's collateral signature, the ledger showing my $150,000 being used to buy a Porsche. I created 3 separate encrypted flash drives. I dumped the hard copies into a fireproof safe hidden in the back of my closet. I walked out of my office. The sun had set and the apartment was cast in dark, long shadows. Ethan was sitting on the sofa, a cold cup of coffee in his hands, waiting for me. He looked up, and whatever he saw in my posture made him stand up immediately. "Izzy?" he asked, his voice low. "Did you find the 30,000? I walked over to him, reaching out and taking his hands in mine. They were warm and steady, the exact opposite of my family. "Ethan," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion, "Julian didn't just steal our savings. He stole our identities. He used our social security numbers to forge federal loan applications. We are listed as executive officers in a massive government fraud scheme." Ethan's eyes widened in sheer disbelief. The architect in him, the man who valued structure, legality, and rules, was completely short-circuiting. He committed federal fraud using our names. If the government audits him, we go down with him. We could go to prison, Ismira. "We are not going to prison," I told him, my grip on his hands tightening, "because we are going to burn them to the ground before the government even realizes what happened." "I'm calling the police right now," Ethan said, reaching for his phone on the coffee table. I placed my hand firmly over his, stopping him. "No. If you call the local police, they won't understand the complexity of the commercial fraud. They will just call Julian in for questioning. Julian will hire a high-powered defense attorney. Corvian will hide the remaining assets, and Nalira will spin a story that I authorized the use of our SSNs for a family business venture. They will drag this out in civil court for a decade, and we will never be clean." "Then what do we do?" Ethan asked, his voice thick with a dangerous, protective anger. I looked toward the window, out at the glittering skyline of Chicago. The city was full of predators, but it was also full of hunters. "We don't go to the local police," I said smoothly. "We go to the apex predators. Tomorrow morning, I am making a phone call to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, but we are not going to let them arrest Julian today. We are going to build a cage so tight, so perfectly constructed, that when the doors finally lock, my entire family will be trapped inside it forever." I walked back into the kitchen, picked up my phone, and finally replied to my mother's email. "Mom, Julian's accounts look perfectly fine, but my compliance department flagged a mandatory 14-day hold on the mutual fund due to market volatility. I cannot release the $30,000 right now. Tell Julian to hold off the contractor. I'm sorry." I hit send. I was cutting off their oxygen supply. The investigation was over. The execution protocol had officially begun. Part 3. The Cat and Mouse Game. The Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in downtown Chicago is not a place that inspires warmth. It is a fortress of gray carpet, frosted glass, and the sharp, sterile scent of industrial floor cleaner. There are no dramatic interrogations happening in the lobby, just a quiet, terrifying efficiency. When Ethan and I walked through the metal detectors at 8 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, I didn't feel fear. I felt the absolute icy clarity of a surgeon stepping into an operating room. We were escorted into a windowless conference room where we met Special Agent David Sterling. Sterling was a veteran of the White-Collar Crime Division. He was in his late 40s, wearing a tailored Navy suit that hid the rigid posture of a man who had spent 2 decades dissecting corporate psychopaths. He didn't offer us a warm smile or a cup of coffee. He simply sat down, opened the thick, indexed binder of financial records I had printed from Julian's subledger, and began to read. For 45 minutes, the only sound in the room was the crisp turning of pages. Ethan sat perfectly still next to me, his hands folded on the table. Finally, Agent Sterling closed the binder. He looked up, his pale blue eyes locking onto mine. There was a glimmer of deep, professional respect in his expression. "Ms. Veermont," Sterling said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone. "Most financial analysts bring us suspicions. You brought us a fully autopsied corpse. The synthetic identity fraud using your social security numbers, the forged W-2s, the SBA loan application signed by your father. This is textbook, multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud." "So you can arrest him," Ethan said, leaning forward, the tension of the last month bleeding into his voice. "You have the proof. You can arrest Julian today and clear our names." Sterling shook his head slowly. "I could arrest Julian Vance this afternoon for identity theft, but if I do that, we only cut off one head of the snake. Julian will immediately hire a shark defense attorney. He will claim it was a clerical error made by an outsourced accounting firm. Your father, Corvian, will liquidate whatever hidden assets he has left to post Julian's bail, and your mother will shred every physical document in their estate. To put Julian away for 20 years, and to legally prove your father is a knowing co-conspirator rather than a clueless victim, we don't just need the forged applications. We need to catch them in the act of laundering the stolen federal funds. We need to prove intent to conceal." I leaned back in the stiff leather chair. "You want to track the money?" "I want to build a honeypot," Sterling corrected, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Julian is sitting on over $1 million in stolen federal relief money that he hasn't spent yet. Right now, it's sitting in a tangled web of regional bank accounts. He knows the SBA audit grace period is ending soon. He is going to be incredibly desperate to move that money offshore, somewhere the IRS and federal auditors can't touch it. I need you to give him that opportunity." The sheer brilliance of the FBI's strategy washed over me. They didn't just want to catch Julian, they wanted Julian to willingly hand the stolen money directly to the federal government, completely eliminating his ability to fight the charges in court. "You want me to feed him a fake investment channel?" I concluded. Sterling nodded. "We have a federally monitored, dummy corporate account. On paper, it looks like a highly exclusive, unregulated tech incubator fund based in the Cayman Islands. It's designed specifically to attract white-collar criminals looking to park dirty money. But you are the internal auditor, Ismira. Julian knows your background. If you pitch this to him, he won't suspect a thing. Can you play the naive, helpful sister-in-law for another 6 months?" I thought about my canceled wedding dress hanging in the back of my closet. I thought about the 6 years of savings stolen to buy my sister a Porsche. I looked at Ethan, whose pristine credit was currently being used to prop up a criminal empire. "Agent Sterling," I replied, my voice perfectly level, "I will play whatever role is necessary to watch them burn." And so, the agonizing 6-month cat-and-mouse game officially began. If discovering the betrayal was a sharp, sudden stab wound, the next half year was a slow psychological torture. I had to smile, I had to attend family dinners, I had to sit across from the people who had sacrificed my future and pretend I didn't hold the detonator to their entire lives. The perfect opportunity to set the FBI's trap arrived 2 months later, during a mandatory Sunday dinner at my parents' estate. Walking into that massive house was a masterclass in cognitive dissonance. Nalira had hired a private chef to prepare a prime rib roast. The dining room table was set with fine crystal and imported silver. Corvian sat at the head of the table pouring a $200 bottle of Cabernet. Everything looked like the epitome of generational wealth. Yet, I knew for an absolute fact that the bank had already initiated the silent preliminary steps of foreclosure on Corvian's distribution company, and the mortgage on this very house was barely hanging by a thread. They were dining on the deck of the Titanic, completely ignoring the water rising around their ankles. Talira arrived late, as always, making a grand entrance in a brand new Chanel tweed jacket and carrying a Birkin bag. Julian trailed behind her, wearing a custom-tailored suit and a smug, insufferable smirk. "Ismira, Ethan, so glad you guys could make the drive from the city," Julian said, clapping Ethan on the shoulder a little too hard. "I know things have been tight for you guys since the house fell through. How's the little apartment?" Ethan smiled politely, though I could see a muscle feathering in his jaw. "It's fine, Julian, just focusing on work." During dinner, Nalira played her favorite game, passive-aggressive comparison. She subtly praised Talira's flawless skin and Julian's brilliant mind, while shooting me sympathetic, condescending glances about how tired I looked from my demanding corporate job. Julian's Series A funding is practically guaranteed by the end of the quarter, Corvian boasted, raising his wine glass. The boy is a visionary. I always knew it. It's just about managing the capital efficiently right now, Julian said, adopting a fake, humble tone. The tax burden on early-stage tech investments in the U.S. is brutal. I'm spending half my time just looking for a secure place to park our operational liquidity before the IRS takes 40%. It was almost too easy. He was handing me the opening on a silver platter. I took a sip of my water, dabbing my mouth with a linen napkin. You know, Julian, I said casually, keeping my eyes fixed on my plate. If you are looking for tax advantage operational parking, you shouldn't be using domestic commercial banks. The corporate taxes will eat your seed money alive. The entire table went quiet. Julian looked at me, his smug expression faltering slightly. He hated when I spoke about finance because it reminded him that I actually had the credentials he was faking. Oh, and what does the great corporate auditor suggest? Julian asked, a hint of mockery in his voice. My firm handles compliance for several Fortune 500 tech CEOs. I lied, my voice dripping with the exact kind of exclusive insider knowledge I knew Julian craved. They don't use domestic banks. They use a closed-door incubator fund out of the Caymans called the Apex Vanguard Trust. It legally classifies capital injections as research grants rather than taxable revenue. It completely shields the money from domestic IRS audits. It's strictly invite-only. Usually requires a $10 million minimum, but because of my position at the firm, I occasionally get allocation passes for family. I looked up, making direct eye contact with him. But I'm sure your financial advisors already have something similar set up. Julian's eyes dilated. Greed is a highly predictable chemical reaction. He was sitting on $1 million of stolen SBA loan money, terrified of a federal audit, and I had just dangled a magical, untraceable offshore vault right in front of his face. Apex Vanguard? Julian asked, trying to sound indifferent while leaning slightly forward. I think my wealth manager mentioned them. You have an allocation pass? I have one left for this fiscal year, I said with a shrug, but it's highly complex. You probably don't need it. No, Corvian interjected abruptly, his panic momentarily breaking through his wealthy facade. Corvian knew the SBA loans were tied to his name. He wanted that money hidden just as badly as Julian did. Ismira, if you have access to a secure, tax-free vehicle for your brother-in-law's capital, you should absolutely share it with him. We are family. We protect our own. The irony of that statement almost made me laugh out loud. We protect our own. I can email you the prospectus and the secure wire routing numbers tomorrow, Julian, I offered sweetly, just to look over. Julian smiled, a wide, predatory grin, entirely convinced he had just manipulated me into giving him VIP access to a billionaire's tax haven. Send it over, Izzy. I'll have my team review it. The trap was successfully planted, but Julian was paranoid. He didn't transfer the money immediately. He spent the next 4 months testing the waters, sending small $10,000 test wires into the FBI's diamond account, checking if he could withdraw it, testing the digital infrastructure. Agent Sterling monitored every single keystroke from his office, letting Julian play in the sandbox, waiting for him to feel completely safe. Those 4 months of waiting were the most grueling test of my psychological endurance, primarily because of my sister, Talira. Flush with stolen money and emboldened by her husband's supposed genius, Talira decided to launch a lifestyle and business podcast called The Platinum Mindset. It was a masterclass in sheer, unadulterated hubris. She bought a $5,000 audio setup, converted one of the spare bedrooms in their luxury townhouse into a neon-lit studio, and began broadcasting her delusions to the world. Because she was conventionally attractive and spent a fortune on Instagram ads, she actually built a decent following of naive listeners who bought into her fake aesthetic. Ethan and I would sit in our apartment, listening to her episodes on our commute, using her arrogant words as fuel to keep our focus sharp. Welcome back to the Platinum Mindset, beauties. Talira's sickeningly smooth voice would echo through my car speakers. Today, we are talking about abundance. So many people are trapped in a poverty mindset. They work their miserable 9-to-5 corporate jobs, they save pennies for years just to buy a basic, mediocre house, and then they get bitter when the universe doesn't reward them. You have to manifest wealth. My husband, Julian, didn't build a multi-million-dollar tech company by playing it safe and following the rules. He disrupted the system. He took massive risks. You cannot be afraid to take what is yours. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. She was literally describing her husband's federal wire fraud as a mindset disruption. She was publicly mocking Ethan and me for working hard and saving our money, all while wearing clothes paid for by my stolen wedding fund. In episode 7, she crossed a line that solidified her fate in my mind. Sometimes you have to leave toxic people behind, even if they are family, Talira announced into her microphone. I have family members who are just completely consumed by jealousy. When Julian's company took off, instead of celebrating our success, they wallowed in their own financial failures. They blamed the economy, they canceled their little life events, and they projected their misery onto us. You have to cut those energy vampires out of your life. She was actively rewriting history. She was painting me as the bitter, jealous sister who had failed in life, completely erasing the fact that her entire existence was currently subsidized by my stolen identity. Let her talk, Ethan would say, reaching over to turn off the car radio. Every word she records is just another layer of concrete around her ankles when this whole thing sinks. He was right. Agent Sterling had requested a transcription of every single podcast episode. Talira's public declarations of her husband's wealth, her detailed descriptions of their luxury purchases, and her claims of being an active partner in his business journey were establishing a massive, undeniable paper trail of her complicity in the lifestyle funded by the fraud. She was eagerly building her own federal indictment for tax evasion and possession of stolen property, all for the sake of some podcast downloads. Month 5 bled into month 6. The silence from the FBI was deafening. I began to worry that Julian had gotten spooked, that he had found a different offshore channel to hide the SBA money. My sleep became fractured. I was living a double life, maintaining my performance at my corporate audit firm by day and analyzing the psychological decay of my family by night. Then, on a rainy Thursday afternoon in late April, precisely 6 months after I discovered the photos in Aspen, my cell phone vibrated on my office desk. The caller ID was blocked, but I knew the cadence of the ring. I picked it up immediately. Ms. Vieramont? Agent Sterling's voice came through the line, crisp and strictly professional. Agent Sterling, tell me. The bait was taken, Sterling said. I could hear the faint sound of computer keyboards clacking in the background of the FBI field office. At exactly 2:14 p.m. today, Julian Vance initiated a massive tiered wire transfer from 3 separate regional banks. He liquidated his domestic holding accounts. I stopped breathing. How much? $850,000, Sterling confirmed. The funds bypassed the standard SWIFT network using the cryptographic protocols you provided him. The money has successfully landed in the Apex Vanguard dummy account. He didn't just step into the trap, Ismira. He dove in headfirst and locked the door behind him. A profound, terrifying silence settled over my office. The cat and mouse game was officially over. Julian had crossed the Rubicon. By transferring the stolen federal funds into what he believed was an offshore account to evade the IRS and domestic tracking, he had committed the ultimate, irrefutable act of money laundering. And my father? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Corbian Viramont's signature was used to authorize the release of the funds from the commercial escrow, Sterling replied coldly. He is legally documented as a co-conspirator in the transfer of illicit capital. We have them both. I closed my eyes, letting the immense, crushing weight of the last 6 months slowly lift off my shoulders. What happens now, Agent Sterling? Now, we build the tactical execution, Sterling said. We don't just pick them up at a traffic stop. White-collar criminals like Julian need a public stage to fully comprehend their destruction. They need to be stripped of their illusion in front of their peers. Do you know of any upcoming events where Julian and your father will be in the same room? I opened my calendar on my laptop. A red circle marked a date just 2 weeks away. Actually, Agent Sterling, I said, a slow, predatory smile touching my lips for the first time in half a year. Julian is hosting a massive Series A launch gala at the Ritz-Carlton. He's inviting 50 of the top venture capitalists in the city. My parents forced me to RSVP to show family unity. Perfect, Sterling said. Buy a nice dress, Esmira. We are going to crash the party. Part 4. The flailing of cornered animals. When you trap a predator, you do not immediately walk into the cage. You lock the door, turn off the lights, and wait for the starvation to set in. You let their own panic do the exhausting work of breaking their spirit. Agent David Sterling was a master of the slow starvation. After Julian Vance aggressively wired $850,000 of stolen federal relief money into the FBI's Apex Vanguard honeypot, Sterling didn't dispatch a SWAT team. Instead, he executed a synchronized silent financial garrote. With the primary illicit funds successfully isolated in the dummy offshore account, Sterling needed to ensure Julian felt the walls closing in before the Series A gala. He contacted the compliance departments of the 3 domestic regional banks where Julian held his auxiliary operating accounts. The accounts used to pay his luxury car leases, his country club dues, and my sister's exorbitant credit card bills. Under the guise of routine Patriot Act anti-money laundering reviews, the banks placed immediate administrative freezes on every single one of Julian's domestic assets. It wasn't a criminal seizure yet, just a bureaucratic lock. To a man like Julian, who survived entirely on the illusion of endless liquidity, it was the equivalent of cutting his oxygen line. The psychological collapse happened in exactly 4 days. It started on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting at my desk reviewing a corporate audit file when Ethan sent me a text message. It was a screenshot of Talira's Instagram story. The background was the interior of a high-end designer boutique on Oak Street. The text over the photo read, "When the banking system's security updates decline your black card. Ugh, the price of doing massive international business. #TechWife problems." I smiled softly to myself. The squeeze was working. By Wednesday evening, the annoyance had mutated into sheer, unadulterated panic. Julian was completely locked out of his domestic cash flow, and when he tried to log into the Apex Vanguard portal to pull some of his offshore funds back, the screen greeted him with a glaring red error code. Account under international compliance review. Funds temporarily restricted. He had essentially locked his own stolen fortune inside a federal vault and thrown away the key. Paranoia is a highly destructive force. Julian couldn't tell Talira that the federal government was investigating him for wire fraud because he still desperately believed this was just a massive banking error. But he needed a scapegoat to explain to his furious, materialistic wife why they suddenly couldn't afford their lifestyle just 10 days before his massive Series A gala. And in his arrogant, calculating mind, there was only one logical target: the corporate auditor who had introduced him to Apex Vanguard in the first place. Me. He convinced Talira that I had intentionally sabotaged the offshore transfer. He spun a narrative that I had used my corporate clearances to freeze his money out of pure, venomous jealousy over his success. He told her I was trying to publicly humiliate them right before his launch party because I was bitter about my canceled wedding. He lit the fuse of Talira's entitlement, stepped back, and let the golden child explode. Thursday afternoon in downtown Chicago was bustling. The lobby of my corporate audit firm is a sprawling expanse of polished white marble, floor-to-ceiling glass, and high-level security protocols. You do not just walk into the elevators. You have to pass a heavily guarded reception desk and dual biometric scanners. I was walking across the marble floor toward the exit, holding my encrypted leather briefcase, heading out to grab a quick late lunch with Ethan, who had walked over from his architecture firm 2 blocks away. Ethan was waiting for me near the revolving glass doors. Suddenly, the heavy glass doors didn't just revolve, they were violently shoved open. Talira stormed into the lobby. She looked completely unhinged. Her usually flawless blonde hair was messy, her designer sunglasses were pushed up on her head, and her face was flushed a dark, angry red. She had driven straight from some declined transaction in the Gold Coast, fully weaponized by Julian's lies. "Esmira!" her voice shrieked, echoing sharply across the cavernous marble lobby. Dozens of high-level corporate executives, attorneys, and analysts stopped in their tracks, turning to stare at the woman disrupting the quiet professionalism of the building. Ethan immediately stepped forward, his posture shifting into a defensive stance, but I held up a hand, silently signaling him to wait. I didn't back away. I stood my ground, my posture perfectly straight, holding my briefcase securely by my side. Talira marched right up to me, invading my personal space, her chest heaving. "You vindictive, jealous bitch," she hissed, her voice loud enough for the security guards 20 feet away to hear clearly. "Undo it. Undo the freeze right now." I looked at her, my expression completely blank. I have no idea what you are talking about, Talara. You are in my place of work. Lower your voice. Don't you play your little corporate games with me, she screamed, the last shred of her sanity snapping. Julian told me everything. You messed with the offshore routing. You froze our accounts because you can't stand the fact that my husband is a millionaire and you're just a miserable paper pusher living in a rented apartment. You're trying to ruin his gala. The sheer irony of her statement, calling me a paper pusher while she was currently wearing a Chanel jacket paid for by my stolen house savings, was almost poetic. Talira, I said calmly, deliberately keeping my voice in a low, even register to contrast her hysteria. Julian's banking problems are his own. If his accounts are frozen, it's because the banks flagged his activities. I highly suggest you leave this building before you do something you will severely regret. She didn't hear a word of reason. Her entire identity was built on credit cards and social dominance, and I was the physical embodiment of the wall that she had just crashed into. Give me the access codes, she shrieked, her eyes darting to the leather briefcase in my hand. In her manic, technologically illiterate mind, she genuinely believed I carried the codes to Julian's bank accounts inside my work bag. Before I could even blink, Talira lunged. She swung her hand back and slapped me hard across the left cheek. The sharp, cracking sound of skin hitting skin echoed like a gunshot in the quiet lobby. My head snapped to the side, a hot sting radiating across my jawline. But I didn't drop my briefcase. I gripped the handle tighter. Hey! Ethan roared, sprinting across the marble floor. But Talira wasn't done. Having failed to stun me, she grabbed the lapels of my blazer and tried to violently wrestle the briefcase out of my hand. She was clawing at me, screaming incoherently about Julian's money, completely oblivious to the fact that she was committing a violent crime in a room equipped with 6 4K resolution security cameras and 3 armed guards. Ethan reached us first. He didn't hit her. He simply grabbed Talira by the shoulders and forcefully shoved her backward. She stumbled in her high heels and fell hard onto the polished marble, her designer bag spilling its contents across the floor. "Do not touch her!" Ethan shouted, positioning his body entirely between Talira and me. 2 building security guards were on her a second later. They didn't care that she was wearing Chanel. They grabbed her arms, hauled her roughly to her feet, and pinned her face first against the cold glass of the reception barrier. "Let me go!" "Do you know who my husband is?" Talira wailed, thrashing against the guards. "She stole our money! Arrest her!" I stood behind Ethan, calmly adjusting the lapels of my blazer. I reached up and touched my stinging cheek. I didn't feel fear. I felt the cold, hard satisfaction of a perfectly executed maneuver. Cornered animals always bite, and Talira had just bitten down on a highly electrified fence. The Chicago Police Department arrived exactly 8 minutes later. They reviewed the security footage on the spot. It was undeniable, unprovoked physical battery and attempted robbery. They read my sister her Miranda rights right there in the lobby, clicked heavy steel handcuffs around her wrists, and marched the weeping, humiliated golden child out through the revolving doors, stuffing her into the back of a squad car in front of half the financial district. As the police cruiser pulled away, Ethan turned to me, his hands physically shaking with adrenaline and rage. "Are you okay? I'm going to kill them, Ismira. I'm going to kill all of them." "I am perfectly fine," I said quietly, looking at my reflection in the glass door. The red mark on my cheek was already fading. Talira just handed us the final piece of leverage. "Let's go to the precinct. The real show is about to start." We followed the police to the 18th District Precinct. It was a bleak, fluorescent-lit building that smelled of stale coffee and industrial disinfectant. I was sitting in a small, cramped interview room with Ethan, giving my official statement to a tired-looking detective, detailing the unprovoked assault. The heavy wooden door to the interview room swung open abruptly. It wasn't a police officer. It was my mother, Nalira, followed closely by my father, Corvian. They had received the frantic phone call from Talira at the booking desk. I fully expected them to burst into the room weeping, begging me to drop the charges. I expected my father to offer me a hollow apology, or for my mother to fall to her knees and use her classic manipulation tactics to save her precious youngest daughter from a permanent criminal record. But as Nalira walked into the room, the temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. There were no tears. There was no theatrical performance of a heartbroken mother. Nalira's face was set in a rigid, sociopathic mask of absolute chilling calculation. Corvian stood behind her, his face pale, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. He locked the heavy wooden door behind them, shutting the detective out in the hallway for a moment. "Mom?" I asked, perfectly playing the role of the shaken victim. What are you doing? Talira attacked me. Nalira walked slowly across the linoleum floor until she was standing directly across the small metal table from me. She didn't look at my bruised cheek. She didn't ask if I was okay. She reached into her expensive leather tote bag and pulled out a thick, unmarked manila folder. She dropped it onto the metal table with a heavy, definitive thud. You are going to walk out of this room, Nalira said, her voice a low, venomous whisper that I had never heard in my 33 years of life. You are going to tell that detective that it was a simple sibling misunderstanding, that you mutually engaged in a physical altercation, and you are dropping all charges against your sister immediately. Ethan stood up from his chair, his broad shoulders squared. Are you out of your mind, Nalira? She assaulted Ismira in front of 50 witnesses. She is going to jail. Nalira didn't even acknowledge Ethan's existence. She kept her dead, reptilian eyes locked entirely on me. She reached out with one manicured finger and flipped open the cover of the manila folder. If you press charges against Talira, Nalira said smoothly, I will walk out of this room, find the lead investigator of the Financial Crimes Unit, and hand him this folder. I looked down at the documents illuminated by the harsh overhead light. For a fraction of a second, my heart genuinely stopped. The air evacuated my lungs, not from fear, but from the sheer, unfathomable depths of their depravity. Lying on the table were perfectly forged corporate formation documents for 3 different shell companies based in Delaware. Below them were printouts of the Small Business Administration loan applications, the exact loans Julian had used to steal $2 million from the federal government. But Julian's name wasn't on the primary applicant line. My name was Ismira Viramont, Chief Executive Officer. I saw printed emails meticulously fabricated to look like they came from my personal IP address, directing Julian on how to move the funds. I saw wire transfer authorizations bearing an absolutely flawless forgery of my signature. What is this? I whispered, genuine horror bleeding into my voice. This, Nalira said, a cruel, triumphant smile twisting her lips, is the absolute proof that Ismira Viramont, a highly educated senior corporate auditor, masterminded a multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud scheme. It proves that you used your innocent brother-in-law, Julian, as a clueless frontman because he didn't have the financial literacy to pull it off. It proves that you manipulated your aging father into co-signing the loans, and then you set up an illegal offshore Apex Vanguard account to hide your stolen money. I stared at the woman who had given birth to me. She hadn't just used my social security number to get a loan. Months ago, long before the Apex Vanguard trap was even set, my parents and Julian had systematically constructed a flawless, airtight scapegoat. They knew the SBA loans were highly illegal. They knew the federal government might eventually audit them. So they spent months creating a parallel paper trail designed specifically to frame me if the authorities ever came knocking. They were always going to throw me to the wolves. From the very beginning, I was nothing but a sacrificial lamb, fattened up to take a 30-year federal prison sentence so Julian and Talira could live in luxury. You see, Ismira, Corvian finally spoke, his voice trembling slightly with cowardly adrenaline. We didn't want it to come to this. We love you, but you are trying to destroy your sister's life over a little slap. If you force our hand, we will protect our family. Who do you think the FBI will believe? A tech founder with a communications degree or a corporate auditor with access to offshore banking networks? You have the motive. You have the skills. The paperwork is flawless. They were blackmailing me with federal prison. Ethan looked like he was about to physically leap across the table and strangle my father. I reached under the table and gripped his thigh, digging my fingernails into his leg to keep him silent. If I fought them right now, if I called their bluff in a state police precinct, they would panic and scatter. The FBI's trap would shatter. I needed them to feel supreme, untouchable power. I needed them to believe they had completely broken me, so they would walk blindly into the slaughterhouse at the Series A gala. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to become shallow and erratic, mimicking a woman having a total panic attack. I looked down at the forged documents, letting tears of defeat well up in my eyes. You would send your own daughter to federal prison? I asked, my voice cracking perfectly. Nalira leaned over the table, her face inches from mine. I will do whatever it takes to protect Julian's launch next week. Talira is not spending the night in a cell. Drop the charges, Ismira. Be a good girl. And this folder goes straight into the fireplace tonight. Defy me, and I will end your entire existence. I stared into her eyes for a long, agonizing moment. I let her see my fear. I let her drink it in, feeding the endless black hole of her narcissism. Okay, I whispered, dropping my gaze to the floor. Okay, I'll tell the detective it was a mistake. I'll drop the assault charges. Corvian let out a long, heavy sigh of relief. Nalira simply smirked, snapping the manila folder shut. I knew you would see reason, darling, Nalira said, her aristocratic tone instantly returning as if she hadn't just threatened to destroy my life. She reached out and patted my cheek, the exact cheek Talira had slapped an hour earlier. We expect to see you and Ethan at Julian's Series A gala next Friday. We bought a VIP table. It's important we show the investors that the Viremont family is fiercely united. They wanted to parade me around. They wanted to show off the broken, obedient dog they had successfully whipped into submission. We will be there, I murmured. Nalira and Corvian unlocked the door and walked out to the reception desk to collect their golden child. Ethan waited until the heavy wooden door clicked shut. He turned to me, his eyes wide with shock and absolute revulsion. It's Mira. They forged an entire federal conspiracy against you. They were going to frame you for everything. I sat up straight in the metal chair. The tears vanished instantly. The trembling in my hands ceased. My heart rate, which I had carefully controlled, settled back into a rhythmic, methodical beat. I know, I said, my voice dropping back to its cold, analytical baseline. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I hadn't been panicking. I had been recording. I hit stop on the voice memo app. The digital file had captured every single word of Nalira's blackmail, every threat, and Corvian's explicit admission of the forged documents. They think they just won, I told Ethan, staring at the digital audio file on the screen. They think they are the apex predators, but they just handed us the final nail for their coffins. They didn't just confess to wire fraud, they just committed felony extortion, blackmail, and conspiracy to commit perjury. I stood up from the metal table, smoothing my blazer one last time. Come on, Ethan, I said, a dark, terrible anticipation pooling in my chest. Let's go tell the detective we are dropping the state charges. Talira can have her freedom for the next 8 days. Let her buy a new dress. Let Julian rent the Ritz-Carlton. Let my parents polish their jewelry. Ethan smiled, a grim, feral expression. Because the higher they climb, the more bones they break when they hit the floor. I finished. We walked out of the precinct into the cold Chicago night. The countdown to the gala had officially begun, and hell was coming with us. Part 5. The Financial Bloodbath Gala. There is a very specific clinical silence that occurs in a slaughterhouse right before the machinery engages. The cattle walk up the ramp entirely unaware of the architecture of their own demise, lulled into a false sense of security by the routine of the herd. They step onto the polished steel, looking forward, completely blind to the fact that every exit has already been systematically sealed behind them. Friday evening arrived with the heavy, humid weight of an impending Chicago thunderstorm. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in our bedroom. I didn't reach for a cocktail dress. I didn't reach for the delicate, feminine fabrics my mother always preferred I wear to her high society events. I reached for a bespoke, charcoal gray corporate pantsuit. The tailoring was aggressive. Sharp shoulders, a severe neckline, and trousers that fell with absolute precision over my black stiletto heels. I pulled my dark hair back into a tight, unforgiving knot at the base of my neck. I applied a matte, dark crimson lipstick. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the obedient daughter who had drained her life savings to save a failing patriarch. I saw a senior internal auditor preparing to deliver a terminal diagnosis. Ethan walked into the room, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored black suit. He looked at my reflection, his eyes tracing the sharp lines of my outfit. He didn't ask if I was ready. He simply walked up behind me, placed his hands firmly on my shoulders, and met my gaze in the glass. They think they own you, Ethan murmured, his voice a low, steady rumble of absolute support. They are about to find out exactly what happens when you try to cage a predator, I replied quietly. We took a black car to the Ritz-Carlton. The streets of the Gold Coast were slick with the early evening rain, reflecting the neon lights of the city. As we pulled up to the grand entrance, the valet opened my door. The heavy, opulent scent of expensive lilies, roasted tenderloin, and white truffles drifted out from the grand ballroom. Julian had spared absolutely no expense for his Series A launch gala. And why would he? He was entirely out of his own money, his accounts were frozen by the federal government, and he was desperately relying on the multi-million-dollar checks from the venture capitalists in this room to save his fake empire. This party was his final, frantic gasp for oxygen. Ethan and I walked into the sprawling ballroom. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over 50 of Chicago's most prominent investors, tech magnates, and wealth managers. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos circulated with trays of vintage Dom Perignon and Beluga caviar. It was a masterpiece of fraudulent luxury. My mother, Nalira, spotted us immediately. She was wearing a floor-length emerald silk gown, a diamond tennis bracelet glittering on her wrist. She detached herself from a conversation with a prominent hedge fund manager and glided across the carpet toward us. Corvian trailed a step behind her, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. Nalira stopped perfectly in front of me, leaning in close as if to give me an affectionate, motherly kiss on the cheek. "You look terribly rigid, Esmera," Nalira whispered, her breath warm against my ear, her tone dripping with veiled venom. "Smile. Relax your shoulders. You are here to celebrate your brother-in-law. Remember the folder I have sitting in my safe at home. Play your part, darling, or I will ruin you." She pulled back, flashing a brilliant, camera-ready smile for the room. I didn't flinch. I didn't break eye contact. I simply gave her a slow, measured blink and curved my lips into a hollow, dead smile. "Of course, Mom, I wouldn't dream of ruining Julian's big night." Corvian let out a tense breath, clearly relieved that I was still playing the role of the subjugated, terrified hostage. He patted Ethan on the shoulder with a patronizing smirk. "Enjoy the champagne, Ethan. Try to learn a thing or two from Julian tonight." We moved toward our assigned table near the back of the room. Talira was holding court near the massive ice sculpture of Julian's fake company logo. She was wearing a breathtakingly expensive backless Prada dress. Since the police had released her and I had formally dropped the assault charges just to maintain the FBI's timeline, her arrogance had mutated into godhood. She genuinely believed her family's power had made her legally untouchable. She caught my eye across the room, raised her champagne flute, and gave me a smug, victorious wink. I picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray and took a slow sip. "Enjoy the view, Talira," I thought. "It's the last one you'll ever have." At exactly 8:30 p.m., the string quartet ceased playing. The heavy velvet curtains behind the main stage parted and the venue's lighting shifted, casting a bright, theatrical spotlight onto the center microphone. Julian Vance jogged onto the stage. He was wearing a custom navy suit, no tie, the top two buttons of his crisp white shirt undone, the classic, effortless, tech visionary uniform. The room offered a polite, expectant round of applause. "Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here," Julian began, his voice booming through the state-of-the-art sound system. He paced the stage, exuding a practiced, charismatic energy, but an auditor's eye is trained to spot micro-expressions. I saw the slight tremor in his hands. I saw the sheen of nervous sweat accumulating on his forehead despite the air conditioning. His bank accounts were frozen solid. If he didn't secure investor commitments tonight, his house of cards would collapse by Monday morning. "We are standing on the precipice of a massive disruption," Julian projected, using his hands to emphasize his empty buzzwords. "Our blockchain integrated AI incubator is not just a software solution. It is a paradigm shift, and tonight I am offering a select few of you the opportunity to join the vanguard of this technological revolution." He droned on, clicking through a visually stunning PowerPoint presentation filled with fabricated metrics, synthesized revenue projections, and completely fake user acquisition graphs. My parents sat at the VIP table right by the stage, beaming with profound pride. Nalira actually dabbed a tear of joy from her eye. I checked the silver watch on my wrist. 8:42 p.m. It was time. I reached into the inner pocket of my charcoal blazer and pulled out my smartphone. I didn't need to hijack the microphone. I didn't need to walk onto the stage and throw a screaming tantrum to expose them. That is how amateurs handle revenge. True destruction is completely silent until the moment of impact. 3 months ago, when Julian had foolishly given me access to his corporate subledger, I didn't just pull his tax documents. I exported his entire CRM database, including the direct private email addresses of every single venture capitalist, angel investor, and hedge fund manager sitting in this ballroom. I opened my email application. Sitting in my drafts folder was a highly encrypted 40-page PDF document. It was an independent forensic audit report. I had compiled it myself, and Agent David Sterling had personally reviewed it to ensure it wouldn't compromise the federal indictment, but would serve as an immediate cease and desist warning to prevent these investors from being defrauded tonight. The PDF contained the undeniable proof of Julian's synthetic identity fraud. It contained screenshots of his defaulted SBA loans. It contained the uniform commercial code liens showing the imminent foreclosure of my father's business. It contained the exact offshore routing numbers Julian had used to launder the stolen government money. In the BCC line of the draft, there were 52 email addresses, every single person in the room with a checkbook. I looked up at Julian, who was currently spreading his arms wide, asking for an initial seed round of $10 million. I looked at my mother, who was practically vibrating with greed. I looked down at my screen. My thumb hovered over the blue arrow. My heart maintained a resting 80 beats per minute. I hit send. For exactly 4 seconds, nothing happened. Julian continued to speak about synergy and market saturation. Then, the symphony began. It didn't happen all at once. It was a rolling, chaotic cascade of digital chimes. Ding. Buzz. Beep. 50 smartphones, resting on the white linen tablecloths or tucked into the breast pockets of tailored suits, simultaneously lit up and vibrated across the massive ballroom. The investors, conditioned to check their devices for urgent market updates, instinctively pulled out their phones. I sat back in my chair, picked up my sparkling water, and watched the chemical reaction of pure financial panic unfold. A prominent venture capitalist sitting at the table nearest to us opened the PDF. I watched his eyes scan the first page. The bored, polite expression on his face instantly vanished, replaced by a deep, terrifying scowl. He aggressively scrolled down, reading the highlighted SBA fraud sections. He didn't politely wait for Julian to finish. He abruptly pushed his heavy wooden chair back. The harsh scraping sound echoed loudly over Julian's voice. The VC stood up, his face a mask of absolute disgust. He didn't say a word to Julian. He just turned his back to the stage, grabbed his wife's hand, and power walked toward the grand exit. Julian faltered on the microphone. As you can see on the graph. Another chair scraped back, then 3 more, then 10. A ripple of outrage and disbelief swept through the crowd. Men and women were leaning across the tables, showing their glowing screens to each other, pointing at the unsealed records of identity theft. The murmurs escalated into loud, angry voices. "This is a federal scam," a woman in a red dress shouted, slamming her phone onto the table. "He's under federal investigation." "The SEC is going to raid this place," a hedge fund manager barked to his associates. "Get out, now, do not sign anything, cut all association." It was a mass exodus. It was a stampede of the wealthy, fleeing a burning building. 50 of the most powerful financial figures in Chicago were shoving their chairs aside, abandoning their half-eaten caviar, and marching toward the heavy oak doors, casting looks of pure revulsion at Julian. Julian stood frozen behind the podium. The color drained from his face so fast he looked like a corpse. He stared at the retreating backs of his investors, completely unable to process the real-time implosion of his entire reality. Wait, please! There's a misunderstanding," he stammered into the microphone, but his voice cracked, sounding pathetic and weak. Down at the VIP table, Corvian and Nalira shot up from their seats. Nalira's jaw was hanging slack, her eyes wide with sheer horror as she watched the billionaires she had spent months trying to court practically running for the exits. Corvian grabbed the arm of an investor rushing past their table. "Marcus, wait! What is happening?" The investor violently yanked his arm out of my father's grip. "You're a disgrace, Corvian. You and your son-in-law are going to federal prison. Don't ever contact my firm again." Corvian stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. He pulled out his own phone and checked his inbox. I had courteously included him on the email list. I watched from the shadows as my father opened the PDF. I watched his eyes lock onto the undeniable, mathematically flawless exposure of their multi-million-dollar crimes. Corvian's head snapped up. His eyes frantically scanned the chaotic, emptying ballroom until they locked onto me. I was sitting perfectly still at the back table, my legs crossed, taking a sip of water, Ethan standing like a sentinel by my side. The realization hit Corvian like a physical blow to the chest. He knew I did it. He knew the obedient, terrified daughter was an illusion. But Corvian Viramon was a cornered animal, and cornered animals rely on their last desperate weapon. "It was her!" Corvian suddenly roared, his voice echoing violently over the dying commotion of the room. He pointed a trembling, accusatory finger directly at me. He turned to Nalira, his face purple with panic. "The folder! Nalira, give me the folder!" Nalira, shaking uncontrollably, reached into her designer tote bag and pulled out the thick manila folder, the one containing the forged documents designed to frame me for the entire federal conspiracy. Corvian snatched it from her hands. He didn't care that the investors were gone. He was in sheer survival mode. He genuinely believed that if he could just get this folder to the authorities, he could legally transfer the blame to me and save his own skin. "I'm calling the police," Corvian bellowed, sprinting away from the VIP table and charging toward the grand oak doors of the ballroom. "She's a hacker. She orchestrated the fraud. I have the proof right here. Do not let her leave this room." He reached the heavy wooden doors, raising his hand to push them open to scream for hotel security. But he didn't have to push them. The massive oak doors were violently thrust inward from the outside. The heavy wood crashed loudly against the interior walls of the ballroom, the sound mimicking a bomb detonating in the enclosed space. Corvian stumbled backward, clutching the manila folder to his chest, his eyes wide with shock. Stepping through the threshold was not hotel security. It was a phalanx of 15 men and women wearing dark, tactical windbreakers. Emblazoned across their chests and backs in stark, highly reflective yellow letters were the acronyms that strike terror into the hearts of white-collar criminals everywhere: FBI and IRSCI. Special Agent David Sterling walked at the very front of the tactical wedge. He was wearing his tailored suit, his federal badge clipped prominently to his belt, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying authority. The remaining stragglers in the ballroom completely froze. The string quartet, who had been packing away their instruments in the corner, dropped their bows. Corvian, blinded by panic and still clinging to his delusion of control, practically threw himself at Agent Sterling. He shoved the manila folder aggressively toward the FBI agent's chest. "Officer, agent," Corvian gasped, spit flying from his lips. "You have to arrest my daughter, Ismira Viremont. She is sitting right back there. She is a corporate auditor, and she masterminded a massive SBA fraud scheme. She forged my signature. She stole the money. I have all the physical proof right here in this folder. She is trying to frame Julian." Agent Sterling stopped. He didn't take the folder. He didn't even look at it. He looked Corvian dead in the eyes with a stare so cold it could freeze absolute zero. "Corvian Viremont," Sterling said, his gravelly voice cutting through the dead silence of the ballroom. Yes, I am Corvian. Please, you have to arrest her before she deletes the servers." "Corvian Viremont," Sterling repeated, louder, entirely ignoring my father's frantic lies. "You are under arrest by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice." Corvian's mouth fell open. The manila folder slipped from his trembling hands, the forged documents spilling uselessly across the expensive carpet. "What? No, you don't understand. The proof is right there. Sterling reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital audio recorder. He held it up. He didn't press play, but the implication was devastating. "We don't need your forged folder, Corvian," Sterling said coldly. "We already have the digital IP logs tracking the creation of those fake documents to your home computer. We have the certified handwriting analysis proving your wife forged Ismira's signature. And we have the crystal clear audio recording of you and Nalira attempting to blackmail a federal witness inside a police precinct last Thursday." Nalira, who had crept up behind Corvian, let out a piercing, guttural shriek. She placed her hands over her ears, physically trying to block out the reality of her total destruction. "No, it's a lie! She set us up!" "Cuff him," Sterling ordered. 2 tactical agents stepped forward. They grabbed Corvian's arms, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the wall of the ballroom. The sharp, metallic ratcheting of heavy steel handcuffs echoed through the room. Corvian began to sob, loud, ugly, pathetic tears of a broken patriarch. Sterling didn't pause. He marched past my weeping father, walking straight down the center aisle toward the stage. Julian was still standing behind the podium. He had completely urinated in his custom Navy suit. A dark, humiliating stain was spreading down his trouser leg. He was trembling so violently, the microphone stand was rattling against the wood. "Julian Vance," Sterling announced, his voice booming over the speakers. "You are under arrest for multi-million-dollar federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and international money laundering. Put your hands on your head and step down from the stage." I want my lawyer," Julian choked out, his voice high and breathless. "You can't do this. I'm a CEO." "You're a phantom," Sterling replied, gesturing to the agents flanking him. They rushed the stage, grabbed Julian by his expensive lapels, and threw him onto the hardwood floor. They planted a knee squarely between his shoulder blades, pinning the tech visionary to the ground as they wrenched his arms behind his back and locked the steel cuffs onto his wrists. "Julian!" a voice screamed from the VIP table. "Talira, my sister, the golden child, the podcast host who preached about leaving toxic people behind," completely snapped. She lunged forward, trying to grab the federal agent who was hauling her husband to his feet. "Get off him!" Talira shrieked, clawing at the agent's tactical vest. "Do you know how much that suit costs? Let him go! We have offshore accounts. We can sue you!" Another agent seamlessly intercepted her, grabbing Talira by the upper arms and pushing her firmly back into a chair. "Ma'am, interfere with a federal arrest again, and you will be leaving in handcuffs for assaulting an officer." Talira collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her hands, wailing hysterically. Her pristine makeup was running down her face in dark, ugly streaks. Her Chanel jacket was askew. Her entire reality, her wealth, her status, her superiority, was being dragged out of the ballroom in steel chains. I stood at the back of the room, my arms crossed over my charcoal suit. I watched two female agents approach my mother. Nalira didn't fight them. Her covert narcissism had completely short-circuited. She simply stared blankly at the wall, completely catatonic, as the agents read her Miranda rights and cuffed her hands in front of her emerald silk gown. Agent Sterling stood in the center of the devastated ballroom, surveying the wreckage of the Viramont Empire. He turned, his pale blue eyes finding me in the shadows. He didn't smile. He didn't offer a thumbs up. He simply gave me a slow, respectful nod. The operation was a flawless, total success. Ethan reached out and intertwined his fingers with mine. His hand was warm, solid, and completely real. "Are you ready to go home, Ismira?" he asked softly. I looked at Corvian being shoved out the door, weeping. I looked at Nalira, shuffling like a zombie. I looked at Talira, screaming on the floor, surrounded by the discarded, fake marketing materials of a non-existent company. I felt absolutely nothing for them. The void where my filial piety used to be was now filled with a deep, profound, and untouchable peace. "Yes," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I am completely done here." We turned our backs on the slaughterhouse, pushed open the side exit doors, and walked out into the cool, cleansing Chicago rain. Part 6. Rebirth from the ashes. When you completely liquidate a highly toxic asset, you do not wake up the next morning and check the stock price. You close the ledger, you secure your remaining capital, and you walk away. I did not spend the next 12 months stalking my family's social media accounts or calling mutual acquaintances to gossip about their downfall. I didn't need to. In a highly connected, fiercely competitive city like Chicago, the spectacular implosion of a multi-million-dollar federal fraud ring makes its own headlines. The justice system is notoriously slow, but when the FBI and the IRS have a digitally certified paper trail, signed confessions on tape, and a cooperating internal auditor who handed them the blueprints, the wheels of consequence turn with terrifying precision. 1 year has passed since the heavy oak doors of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom slammed shut on the Viramont Empire. Julian Vance was denied bail at his very first arraignment hearing. Agent Sterling successfully argued to the federal judge that a man who fabricates synthetic identities and attempts to wire stolen government relief funds into offshore Cayman accounts is the ultimate flight risk. Julian spent the entire year leading up to his trial sitting in a cold concrete holding cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center. The federal prosecutors didn't even have to break a sweat. Faced with the mountain of immutable digital evidence, Julian's high-priced defense attorneys advised him to take a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 3 counts of aggravated identity theft, international money laundering, and major wire fraud. The judge handed down a mandatory minimum sentence of 18 years in a federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Julian will be staring at his 60th birthday by the time he takes his next breath as a free man. The solid gold watch he bought with my stolen wedding fund was seized, melted down, and auctioned off by the United States Treasury to pay back the taxpayers. My father, Corvian, faced an equally brutal reckoning. The bank did not offer him a grace period on the defaulted SBA loans he had so arrogantly co-signed. The preliminary foreclosure I had uncovered during my audit materialized into a full, aggressive asset seizure. The distribution company he had spent 30 years building, his entire legacy, his pride, his excuse for demanding my life savings, was completely liquidated. The massive, meticulously decorated estate where my mother hosted her lavish dinner parties was auctioned off to a commercial real estate developer. Corvian attempted to fight the conspiracy charges, still clinging to the delusion that he was a victim of Julian's manipulation. But Agent Sterling played the audio recording from the police precinct in open court. The jury heard my father's own voice explicitly blackmailing me with forged federal documents. Corvian was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison for conspiracy and obstruction of justice. He lost his business, his home, and his freedom in a single stroke. My mother, Nalira, was the only one who avoided a prison cell, but her punishment was arguably a fate she considers far worse than incarceration. To avoid serving time, Nalira was forced to plead guilty to felony blackmail and identity theft. The judge handed her a suspended sentence with 5 years of heavily monitored, incredibly strict probation. Because the federal government seized every remaining penny of their assets to pay mandatory restitution, Nalira was left with absolutely nothing. The high society friends she had spent decades courting completely abandoned her the moment the indictments became public record. She is a social pariah, permanently exiled from the country clubs and charity galas she used to rule. I'm told she now rents a cramped, dimly lit, one-bedroom walk-up apartment located right next to a noisy interstate highway. There are no more designer ski suits. There are no more trips to Aspen. But it was my sister, Talira, who experienced the most violent collision with reality. For her entire life, Talira was the golden child, perfectly insulated from consequence, her lifestyle entirely subsidized by the stolen labor and credit of others. When the federal government froze Julian's accounts, they didn't just take his business assets, they seized the brand new Porsche Macan. They seized her Chanel jackets, her Birkin bags, and the jewelry purchased with illicit funds. Her carefully curated, arrogant podcast, The Platinum Mindset, was permanently deleted from all platforms. The internet, which she had used to mock Ethan and me for our poverty mindset, turned on her with brutal efficiency. Just 2 months ago, Ethan was driving through a neighboring suburb running an errand for his architecture firm. He stopped at a 24-hour pharmacy to pick up a bottle of water. He saw Talira standing behind register number 3. She was wearing a shapeless green polyester uniform polo. The flawless, expensive blonde highlights were gone, replaced by tired, unwashed hair pulled back in a loose clip. The woman who had lunged at me in a marble lobby, screaming about her husband's millions, was now working the graveyard shift, scanning barcodes for minimum wage to pay her rent. Ethan didn't take a photo. He didn't walk over to her lane to mock her or rub our victory in her face. He simply paid for his water at the self-checkout kiosk and walked out into the night. She wasn't worth our energy anymore. We had completely detached. I watched the ashes of their empire settle from a safe, quiet distance. I didn't feel a single drop of remorse. My professional training taught me that every action in the financial world carries an equal, undeniable consequence. They took a massive calculated risk when they decided to sacrifice my future for their greed. They gambled everything they had on a parasite, and the house always wins. The ledgers were officially closed, the accounts were permanently settled, and my life was finally, completely my own. 14 months after the night I handed over my life savings to my weeping mother, the warm, golden sun of late September poured through the open windows of a historic stone villa. I was not in Chicago. I was standing in this bridal suite of a private, secluded estate overlooking the rolling, cypress-lined hills of Tuscany, Italy. The air was sweet with the scent of blooming lemon groves and ancient olive trees. I stood in front of an antique gilded mirror, my hand smoothing the delicate silk of my custom wedding dress. It was a new dress. I didn't want the one hanging in the back of my closet in Chicago. That fabric was tainted with the memory of their betrayal. This dress was sleek, elegant, and entirely unburdened by the past. There was no toxic mother standing behind me, picking at my hair or criticizing my posture to ensure I looked acceptable for her wealthy friends. There was no jealous, entitled sister lurking in the corner, trying to figure out how to steal the spotlight. Instead, Ethan's mother, a warm, grounded, incredibly kind woman who had welcomed me into her family with fierce protection, stood behind me. She gently pinned a simple, elegant veil into my hair, her eyes shining with genuine maternal pride. It was a look I had spent 33 years desperately seeking from my own blood, only to finally find it in someone else. When a lone acoustic guitarist began playing a soft, beautiful melody in the courtyard below, I picked up my bouquet of white roses and stepped out of the suite. I walked down the ancient stone steps toward the villa's private garden. There were only 30 people seated in the wooden chairs. There were no flying monkeys. There were no judgmental aunts or distant cousins whispering behind their hands. The seats were filled with my true, chosen family. My managing director from the audit firm was sitting in the front row, smiling proudly. My closest friends, the women who had stood by me during the grueling 6-month FBI sting, were standing near the altar. And standing at the end of the aisle, under an archway of woven ivy, was Ethan. He looked incredibly handsome in a sharp, tailored navy suit. When he saw me walking toward him, the absolute love and fierce, unwavering loyalty in his eyes took my breath away. He didn't care about optics or social status or high society approval. He only cared about the foundation we were building together. I walked down the aisle alone. I did not feel a single ounce of sorrow about not having Corvian there to give me away. You cannot give away someone you never truly valued. I gave myself away. I walked my own path, completely untethered, completely free. I took Ethan's hands and we stood together in the warm Tuscan sunlight. When we spoke our vows, we didn't just promise to love each other in sickness and in health. We promised to be an impenetrable fortress for one another. We promised to fiercely protect our peace, to honor our boundaries, and to build a life based on absolute truth. As he slipped the gold wedding band onto my finger, the final, lingering shadow of my broken past simply washed away into the Italian earth. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife, and Ethan pulled me into a deep, passionate kiss. The 30 people in the audience erupted into applause, loud, genuine, and completely full of love. We turned around and walked back up the stone pathway together, hand in hand, stepping into a reality that we had fought tooth and nail to protect. We did not invite a single drop of toxicity into our garden. We left it all behind in the ashes of their own greed. If you are listening to this, and you are currently trapped in the suffocating grip of a toxic family dynamic, if you are constantly sacrificing your own happiness, your finances, and your mental health to appease people who only view you as a resource, I want you to hear this loud and clear. You do not owe them your future. You do not owe them your sanity simply because you share the same DNA sequence. Biology is just a scientific coincidence. It is not a binding contract for lifelong emotional abuse. You have the absolute, undeniable right to cut the ties. You have the right to lock the door, walk away, and rewrite the entire narrative of your existence. Sometimes, the trash takes itself out, and when the smoke finally clears, you will realize that the greatest revenge isn't just watching their destruction. The greatest revenge is building a beautiful, untouchable empire right over their ruins. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. If Ismira's journey resonated with you, or if you've ever had to set a difficult boundary to protect your own peace, please hit the like button and leave a comment below. I read every single one of them. And please, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. Your support helps me continue bringing these stories of healing and justice to life. Remember, your peace is your most valuable asset. Protect it at all costs. I'll see you in the next video.